Welcome, everybody, to Fantasy Football Today, DFS. My name is Sia Nejad. This is not mine, it's your solo pod. And we are going to take an early look at Week 17, and we're going to recap a few of our lineups from Week 16. And speaking of that, FFT, DFS, big congratulations to Hydro22 for winning the Saturday Christmas Eve tournament. And then Kush6 for winning the Sunday Christmas tournament. Again, that was a 3-game slate and I believe a 10-game slate. So congratulations to Hydro22 and Kush6. We're going to actually look at your lineups in a few minutes. But first, we gotta look at my underwhelming lineups. I actually had a bad week. You know what's funny? I could have started this show with welcome to the Gardner Minshew show, because we were so big on Gardner Minshew. Of course, Mike was huge on him. He said he's only, you know what Mike does. He does 5 lineups, and he said 4 out of 5 were going to be Gardner Minshew. So literally at an 80% rate. I ended up playing Minshew at pretty much an 80% rate as well, and I still did pretty poorly. So we're going to take a look at my cash lineup, which didn't cash. I mean, this is just a poor week for me. Let's just be candid about the whole thing. I barely cashed in a few of my tournament lineups, and the other ones were bad. And my cash lineup, I only did one, actually, and it's here. You can see it, and I'll just read it out for those of you that are listening to the podcast and not actually able to see this on YouTube. We're live here, by the way. It's Gardner Minshew. Okay, great start. Christian McCaffrey, which I'm really disappointed in myself about. If you remember from the Tuesday solo pod, I conceived of CMC as more of a contrarian play against Washington's pretty solid defense. And in that context, I was telling myself and telling everybody on Tuesday that I just didn't really like the CMC play, but I kind of just warped into deciding I needed to play him. And that was that's one of those rules that I don't care who's saying it. If I make a decision on a guy like this that I just don't think is a great play, I shouldn't fall into the trap of playing him later in the week just because a lot of people seem to be playing him. Clearly in cash, he was very popular. You see here, 56.6%. I just think I could have got away from CMC. Cash, I get it. But in tournaments, I really could have gotten away from him. Okay, so after CMC, you got Derrick Henry, a big gun there. Juju Smith-Schuster, who I thought was going to get a lot more reps in the first half. He really got all his catches in the fourth quarter. Extremely underwhelming game. Speaking of underwhelming, Marquise Goodwin. Spoiler alert, he's going to be in my tournament lineup too. I was kind of all in on the value of Marquise Goodwin. I didn't think he was going to replicate Tyler Lockett by any means, but did I think he was going to get 3 to 5 catches and potentially a touchdown and somewhere in the range of 50 to 70 yards? Yeah, I kind of thought that. And so this is one of those situations. When I go all in on a guy, I go all in on a guy. You guys know, I and girls as well, you know I don't make a lot of tournament lineups. I'm a single entry 3-max guy. There's very, very little variation with my player pool. Marquise Goodwin was pretty much in every lineup. Fortunately, I had Richie James in this lineup as well, then Noah Fant, Dalvin Cook, and Ravens defense. So for a cash lineup, I think the problematic plays here are probably Dalvin Cook. I probably should have reserved him. I was pretty much all in on Dalvin Cook too. I didn't have him in every lineup, but I had him in most. And I probably could have reserved him for just my tournament lineups. Maybe found a way to try to get Justin Jefferson in there. Noah Fant, he did okay. But ultimately, this lineup, I don't think it was horrible. Again, Gardner Minshew carrying the day. Richie James was just fine. McCaffrey, Henry, they were okay. Not really. And then Dalvin Cook was not good at all. Even though he had 40 yards in the first quarter, he actually had 40 yards like 5 minutes into the game. And they just went away from him for whatever reason. It was not the Dalvin Cook show after the first few carries. So I don't really understand that. But this is my cash lineup. Not a lot to talk about here. It made $0. I'm not very happy with it, but here we are. So I think we can move on to Mike's GPP lineup. So everybody knows that Mike has been doing pretty much exclusively GPP lineups as opposed to cash the latter half of the season. I've enjoyed playing cash, the last few weeks where Mike has kind of taken cash off, and I've done pretty well. As you guys have seen on this show, I've done pretty well. Well, Mike, in his GPP lineup, it's funny. He pretty much gave out his lineup. I mean, he didn't literally give out his lineup, but he pretty much gave out his lineup on Thursday. Like to such an extent, he actually said, I think you're going to kind of get an idea of what my lineup here, my primary lineup is just on this show. That's what he said on Thursday because he was talking about all the players that he liked. Well, remember his favorite stack? It was Gardner Minshew to Dallas Goedert. Let's remember that from the cheat sheet. Christian McCaffrey, we know that didn't really work out. Derrick Henry, CeeDee Lamb with the run back. Okay, nothing novel there. We knew CeeDee Lamb was going to be in play. It was just a matter of fitting him into your lineup at 7,500. And here's the key part. This lineup, for those of you who are listening, made $1,000. The key to the lineup was he was going to be all in on those Giants receivers. He specifically brought up Isaiah Hodgins, and he specifically brought up Richie James, and he said he may play them both in the same lineup. So here we are. Isaiah Hodgins scores 22.90 fantasy points. Richie James, 17 flat. Absolutely perfect. A grand total of 8,000 on those two Giants receivers, and they scored him approximately 40 points. And then TJ Hawkinson. So he gets the Gardner Minshew stack, and then he just goes all in and with CeeDee Lamb run back, and then he goes all in on that other game that he really liked. If you recall, he was off the Chiefs game. And I was not, so my bad on that. But he was completely off of that game, and I remember talking to him about it, kind of being a little bit surprised because of some of the value plays in that game. And he told you he was just playing these two games with Gardner Minshew and almost all of his stacks. So just to go over this lineup again, by the way, double tight end, Mike McClure, the king of double tight end, Hawkinson and Goddard, Gardner Minshew, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, CeeDee Lamb, Isaiah Hodgins, Richie James, TJ Hawkinson, Dallas Goedert, and the Saints defense. Again, this is really interesting because this is a great lineup. It scored 198.6 points. But the funny part is Christian McCaffrey was a complete dud. Derrick Henry, not so great. No fire emojis there, but he picked the right receivers in that Giants game. Remember, he wasn't on Slayton. Slayton was his third favorite receiver in that Giants core because of the value he saw in Isaiah Hodgins and Richie James. So, I keep kind of referencing Mike. There's a reason Mike's on this show. There's a reason he's a professional DFS player and better as well. And I just really encourage everybody. Listen, I think I'm pretty good at this too. I've had some very successful weeks, some very near takedowns in very big tournaments. But, it's Mike that is really kind of exploring the different roster constructions and some of the not contrarian games. He's not playing the contrarian games. He's playing the contrarian roster constructions. And I don't think a lot of people had Isaiah Hodgins and Richie James in the same lineup. People were taking one or the other, which also makes sense to some degree. But his play was, let me get these pass catchers in on both sides of the ball, but I'm going to take the Gardner Minshew value at 4,800, and it worked out. Obviously, Hawkinson really helps this. But Hawkinson, Richie James, and Hodgins, that's pretty much the nuts in that game. Obviously, Justin Jefferson could have been involved there as well. But really, really great lineup. Great stuff for Mike. I know he had a really good week. This was not his only good lineup. I mean, he absolutely crushed it this week. I can tell you just kind of inside knowledge here behind the curtain. He had a really great week. And I hope those of you that followed him and followed his advice also had a great week. I know I got some tweets. Nothing. I don't think I saw anything with a 198.6 in terms of the tweets that were sent out. But if you haven't tweeted a good lineup out already, go ahead and tweet at us because we love to see it. So that's Mike's GPP lineup. We can probably put up, okay, so we can go to my GPP lineup at this point. Another sort of underwhelming score. It actually did cash, but full disclosure, it was like pretty much a min cash. It scored 147.80. And I have Mike Stack in here. I have Gardner Minshew. Welcome to the Gardner Minshew show, everybody. I had Gardner Minshew to Dallas Goedert. And that worked out quite well. We're going to bring it up on the screen in a second. But I had actually Tony Pollard on the bring back. And I was just trying to get different with tournaments in that one. Obviously, in retrospect, CeeDee Lamb would have been the appropriate bring back in that one. But I ended up going with Tony Pollard. I don't know if we have it to bring up on the screen. Maybe I didn't send it to our producer. But the bottom line is, let me just go over the line. Oh, here it is. Oh, good. We have it. Okay, so Gardner Minshew to Dallas Goedert. Tony Pollard on the bring back. Listen, I thought that would be really contrarian. I was waiting for the Tony Pollard spike game. I'm very much aware of the fact that Ezekiel Elliott is getting at least half the carries, and he's getting a lot of the touchdown equity inside the 5 as well. But again, it's Tony Pollard. Can Tony Pollard have a spike game? Maybe this isn't the team to have the spike game against because they've been really good against the run since Jordan Davis has been back. It's been almost a month that he's been back. But again, I thought Tony Pollard could get to the edge, maybe some design screens for him. So I didn't mind that. At 6%, I get Tony Pollard at 7,000. Yeah, I mean, I don't regret that at all. So I had Gardner Minshew to Dallas Goedert with Tony Pollard on the way back. By the way, everybody in the chat, hit the like button if you would. I have Saquon Barkley at running back, Jerick McKinnon at running back, Justin Jefferson. So that made this lineup go. Marquise Goodwin, a flat 0 there, and I still cashed somehow, which is pretty amazing. Richie James, Dallas Goedert again, of course, and Tony Pollard in the Panthers defense. So Panthers defense, I didn't love. My favorite defense was the Ravens at 3,200. There was a defense I'm forgetting right now at 2,800. It was the Saints. 2,800 that I also liked. But again, this is one of those lineups where I had to pay down for defense, and the Panthers were fine. They gave up a ton of points, but they scored 4 points, and at 2,300, I really can't argue with that. I was going for the spike game again with Jerick McKinnon. I could have played Pacheco there. Turns out neither of them would have really worked out. McKinnon had a nice start to the game, just not a nice finish. Saquon was a guy I wanted to play. Again, I played Dalvin Cook in most of my lineups, and those lineups that I played Dalvin Cook in did not cash. So I understand Jefferson was the better play there. That's why he's in this lineup. But full disclosure, I was going for some contrarian plays, or at least contrarian relative to Justin Jefferson. So instead of CeeDee Lamb, I was going Tony Pollard in a lot of lineups. Instead of Justin Jefferson, I was going Dalvin Cook in a lot of lineups. And it could have worked, but it didn't work. So this lineup ended up cashing barely. But, nothing super impressive. Again, I was focused on the contrarian plays, some of the value plays with Goodwin and James. And, Goodwin just simply didn't work out. So that's my GPP lineup. If anybody has questions about just the construction or anything like that, or your construction for week 17, please let me know. But we can actually move on to the Saturday FFT DFS winner. So remember, Saturday was Christmas Eve. So we had the 10-game slate on Saturday. So that was kind of the true big time slate that we had. And we have Hydro. It's HEIDRO 22. He put up 191.96. Pretty great score, pretty interesting lineup here. Oh, I see Dalvin Cook in here. So that's really interesting. I guess I probably convinced you to play Dalvin Cook. So my bad, but you still ranked first out of 200. So good for you. Daniel Jones, Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Devontae Smith. Okay. So obviously I like that. When we were talking about Minshew stacks, of course, my stack was Minshew. I believe it was Minshew to AJ Brown. That was my preferred stack on the cheat sheet. And I believe Mike's was Gardner Minshew. Again, welcome to the Gardner Minshew show. Gardner Minshew to Dallas Goedert. So, I think there were different ways you could have stacked that. Obviously, Goddard presented some value. Devontae Smith at his price, 6,600, presented some value. I just thought A.J. Brown was probably the better play, even though he was way more expensive. But, man, if you had found the cash to do Minshew, Devontae, and A.J. Brown, boy, would that have paid off. But Devontae, an absolutely great play here at 6,600. Pretty sneaky at under 10% ownership. Isaiah Hodgins, he's got in here. Richie James. Oh, well, that looks familiar. Somebody watches the show. Hydro 22. See, this is great, right? Isaiah Hodgins at 18% and Richie James at 46%. I believe that's probably above the field at large because of how we talked about both of them. The fact that you got both of them in your lineup really paid off, and you got TJ Hawkinson in there. I was short on Hawkinson. Mike was not. So good for Hydro here. Good for Mike. Jerick McKinnon at the flex spot. Pretty good lineup. Saints defense. I like that. They scored 8 points, which certainly isn't bad. Not impressive. Not super impressive either. Daniel Jones was his quarterback. So Daniel Jones ended up scoring almost 25 points. This is a great lineup. As far as correlation, he's got Daniel Jones to Richie James. He's got the TJ Hawkinson bring back as opposed to paying up for Justin Jefferson or Dalvin Cook, of course, although he did have Dalvin Cook on the bring back too. So that's interesting. So he had a double bring back, and he takes the least expensive of the Minnesota Vikings. He takes Dalvin Cook at 7,200 compared to Jefferson's 9,300 and Hawkinson's 4,900. So double bring back, good stack here with two receivers, Hodgins and James. And then he gets some of the really good pieces or the good piece out of that Eagles game in Devontae Smith. Really, really impressive lineup. Could have even been better if you had somehow found a way to get off of Derrick Henry or maybe Dalvin Cook. If you got off Derrick Henry, you probably could have paid up for Justin Jefferson in the flex. You just would have had to pay down at the running back position. But this is obviously a really impressive lineup. Okay, so we're almost to our early Week 17 look, but we got to go over one more lineup, and it's our FFT DFS Sunday winner, the 3-game slate. So everybody pay attention to this, because we're going to see a lot of shorter slates once the playoffs roll around. And by the way, those of you that are in the chat, I see you in there. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for being in there. Please hit the like button. So I only bring that up, the shorter slates, because obviously this show goes through the Super Bowl. And I think these shorter slates really present an opportunity with respect to late swap, with respect to different sort of roster constructions and things of that nature. So I think in these shorter slates, like these playoff slates, I tend to be more successful. My guess is Mike McClure tends to be even more successful than he already is as well, because it just allows you to be so unconventional and get away with it and have that lack of convention pay off. And I think when it comes to the playoffs, after week 18, I think we're going to have a lot to say that's different from, maybe some of the podcasts that you're already listening to, or they're just out there in the ether. So just keep that in mind. Make sure you plug in with us during the playoffs, because we'll have a lot to say about some of those slates as well. So this lineup, 196.80, very, very impressive. Tua, Leonard Fournette, Cam Akers. Boy, Cam Akers and Tyler Higbee. Both of those guys are in this lineup. So, I mean, you can pretty much hand this guy the trophy right now, right? And I know we talked a lot about Cam Akers, not as much about Tyler Higbee, but we talked a lot about Cam Akers when we covered the last 15 minutes of that Thursday game-by-game preview. Cam Akers certainly came up. So did Tua to Tyreek Hill, obviously. But Tua to Tyreek Hill, the running backs are Leonard Fournette and Cam Akers. He also had Jalen Waddle in there, who early caught that 84-yard touchdown reception. And honestly, both Tua, Tyreek, and Waddle should have had better games. Just Tua was obviously awful, probably post-concussion, which is unfortunate. But Hill and Waddle with Tua, Romeo Doubs, who had a pretty bad game, Greg Dulcich, Tyler Higbee, Rams defense. If you played the Rams defense and you played either Cam Akers or Tyler Higbee, you had a really good day. If you played any two of those three, frankly, between Cam Akers, Higbee, and Rams defense, you had a really good day. If you played Jalen Waddle, you had a really good day. And Fournette, I thought that was a really clever play, only 14%, which is pretty low considering we're only on a 3-game slate. Pretty clever play there as well. So I think this lineup is great. You got you don't have any, you've got some bring back with that heavy Miami stack with Romeo Doubs. But again, it's a 3-game slate. You don't have to be super conventional. Maybe, this person who was at Cush 6 probably thought to bring back maybe 2 Packers, and he avoided that, which is a really good thing. I mean, you probably could have fit in Watson somewhere in here, or tried to fit in Aaron Jones, and you didn't. And you don't have to force that, especially on a 3-game slate. So I love this lineup. I love the score of 196.80. Really, really good stuff from Cush 6. The contest, by the way, for this week, it's just one this week. And it's a pretty big slate, and the contest is already live, 200 people. So get in that contest right away. It'll probably fill up by Saturday morning, I'm guessing. So get in there now and have at it. It's only $5. I believe the top 15 get paid out. I see you in here, Mike Chavez, Eric Powell, Kevin, thanks for being in here. If you got any questions, Richard, I see you in here. Pollard dropped an easy touchdown, he says. That is true. Pollard could have had a much better day. And honestly, even if he had caught that touchdown, I was still expecting a little bit more fireworks from Tony Pollard, and it just didn't work out. But again, at less than 10% ownership, a guy as explosive as Tony Pollard in a very high-scoring game, I think they ended up scoring like 70-some points, but that was already projected to be a high-scoring game. I just thought Tony Pollard could have that pop game, and if he did, I'd be on the right side of my tournament lineups for sure. Okay, so I think it's time for our early look on Week 17. Some interesting games. We don't have as much weather concerns. There's going to be some weather concerns, with rain and maybe some wind, but this is a completely different slate than last week. So we don't have to worry about snow or extremely freezing temperatures for the most part. Something we'll monitor on Thursday, but I just don't think from a construction standpoint, we need to worry too much about that. We do need to worry about some teams who are going to take their foot off the gas, perhaps because their games aren't as meaningful this week, perhaps relative to next week. Jacksonville stands out as a team that really has everything riding on Week 18 as opposed to Week 17. So you got to be a little careful, playing guys like Travis Etienne, for example. But we're going to go over some of the high totals, some of the dome games, which I think are even though weather's not a huge issue, the dome games are going to be pretty important to at least know where they're at. And we're going to go over quarterback, wide receiver, running back, tight end, my favorite values, the plays I'm already looking at, both in cash and tournaments. But before we do that, we're going to hear a message from our partners.
I've never lost a wingman.
You're lucky. Fly long enough, it'll happen. It's been an honor flying with you.
Gun Maverick, rated PG-13, now streaming on Paramount+.
We are back. This is Fantasy Football Today, DFS, and we're ready to talk Week 17. So let me talk about some of the totals that are relatively high. No, we don't have anything exploding off the page other than the Bears at the Lions, which is a 52-point total. The Niners at the Raiders is a 45.5-point total. I think 45.5 on this slate is at least notable. Broncos at the Chiefs, 45-point total. That's a huge point spread. It'll be interesting to see how many people even want to bother with that game. But it does make sense to bother with some of the players there, right? Especially if you think the Chiefs are going to achieve their implied point total. Vikings at Packers. If weather holds up, which it looks like it probably will, that's a 47-point total. I think that's a really good game to explore. I mean, I think most people are going to look at this slate and they're going to say, by the way, the dome games, Atlanta at Zona, Chicago at Detroit, and there's one other one I think. Those actually might be the only two. But, those two games are going to be popular, but I think Chicago at Detroit is like the obvious one, right? You got Detroit at home, and it's, with Detroit, it's always going to be the Jared Goff show, right? Because we know how much value. First of all, Detroit scores a ton at home. Jared Goff usually plays really, really well at home as well. And he's got a lot of receivers that you can really rely on. I don't want to say, there's a lot of receivers on that team, but I think most of them have gotten phased out, right? It's Amon-Ra St. Brown, and it appears to be DJ Shark that are the guys that are getting the lion's share of the work. So I think a lot of people, just from a roster construction standpoint, it's Jared, whether it's cash or tournament. A lot of people are going Jared Goff and they're going Amon-Ra St. Brown. They may throw in DJ Shark, and then on the other side of it, what do you do there? I think we have to see what the injury situation is with some of these wide receivers for the Bears. Not that you can really count on any of them, but both Claypool and Equanimeous St. Brown were actually out last week. Now, Claypool had a real legit injury. I think it was maybe a knee injury. I'll have to check on that. And Equanimeous St. Brown had a concussion. So I expect St. Brown to be back, especially since he's playing against his brother. How cool is that? Week 17, you get to play against your brother once again. But then you got guys like Dante Pettis, who got a touchdown last week, didn't get much work other than that. Byron Pringle, Cole Kmet. I think Cole Kmet will be the natural bring back there. But I think a lot of people will kind of want to know who's healthy, because I think you could consider double stacking this game at the receivers position. But I also think David Montgomery makes a lot of sense too. He's kind of a higher price than people expect, but I think he's a pretty clever play, whether you're stacking this game or not, to play David Montgomery, because there's not a lot of great running back plays. I'm really curious to see on Thursday during our game-by-game preview where people are at with wanting to roster David Montgomery. Let's start with the QBs, though. Zach's got it up here for those of you that are watching on YouTube. Justin Fields. So I'm going to pass right over Mahomes. You can play Mahomes at 8,500. I don't know what I'm going to do with Mahomes yet, but he's certainly not one of my favorite quarterbacks on this slate. If I play him, it's probably going to be well under the field as almost like a flyer in a random 3-max tournament or something. Jalen Hurts, we don't know if he's going to be back. It's certainly not looking like he is going to be back. So the first one that jumps out to me is Justin Fields. And I talked about that, right? We know that Goff is going to be popular. He's going to be the more popular of those two quarterbacks in terms of stacking. And that's just a price thing, right? I mean, Jared Goff is 5,600 and Justin Fields is 7,100. Also, Justin Fields didn't rush much last week. So we had somebody in the chat actually mention something about Justin Fields and I don't remember who it was, but that he's not going to get shut down, which I didn't expect anyway. But I think you could play Fields and you could play him naked. Oh, here we go. Eric Powell. Thank you. Who's that? Saquon as your profile pic there on YouTube. Bears say they won't shut down Fields. Let's go. I hope he feels better by Sunday versus Lions. He put up big numbers last time. Yeah, we certainly know that Fields has the potential. I wonder, the lack of rushing. I think he did say he was somewhat injured, at the very end of that game, but no injury designation. I wonder if the lack of running was by design. I think that's what scares me a little bit about Justin Fields, but it's certainly a great matchup. And for the record, whether you're talking about Fields or David Montgomery, to the extent that we thought that Detroit was all of a sudden really good against the run, and I thought they were at least improving against the run, certainly relative to how they defend the pass. That kind of exploded in everybody's face last week when Deontay Foreman, Blackshear, and Hubbard just ran. I mean, it was embarrassing. They just ran all over Detroit. So I do think there are paths for both Fields and David Montgomery to succeed just strictly rushing the ball. And I say that because I think you can play Fields naked. I think you can play David Montgomery as perhaps one of two bringbacks in a heavy Detroit stack. I mean, I don't have a problem playing Montgomery with Cole Kmet, for example, with a double stack Jared Goff, DJ Shark and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think I'm probably more inclined to pick, or just as inclined to pick a low-end receiver and hope they go off, whether that be Claypool if he's healthy, or maybe St. Brown or somebody like that. But we'll just have to wait and see the practice reports and see who's emerging there. Other quarterbacks I like, So Trevor Lawrence is only 6,200. Interesting. But again, this is not a team that has anything to play for. And so I don't exactly know how, Trevor's going to handle himself, even if he plays, which I suspect he will. I don't think there's any news that Trevor's going to sit. But when it comes to guys like Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne, I just wonder how much, rushing equity we have with Trevor Lawrence in a game that doesn't mean anything at Houston. So it's just one of those things. I think I'm going to end up leaning away from all Jacksonville Jaguars, even though I think, for example, Travis Etienne at 6,400, I think he makes a ton of sense. But I just don't think I'm there with Jacksonville. I think we have to wait and hear. The matchup is obviously salivating at Houston. That could be a game if all the starters play. And that, of course, includes guys like Evan Ingram, who's really going to jump out at people, maybe Zay Jones, Christian Kirk. If they all play and, they're all playing 4 quarters, which also would make sense because you want to be ready for that final game against Tennessee, then I think we're okay playing them. But then the question has to be raised, if that game is not competitive, I expect it will be because Houston's been competitive. But if it's not competitive, do these guys sit in the fourth quarter? Well, normally I don't think they would. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. There's just a lot of questions there. Aaron Rodgers at 6,000. I think he makes a lot of sense, especially if the weather is fine. I think he makes sense for cash as well, going against Minnesota's defense. They're not getting a ton from Aaron Jones or A.J. Dillon. And we see that Aaron Rodgers is missing some balls here. He missed a long touchdown to Watson. He's, there's a lot of confusion between him and his receivers. Once it clicks, and this could be the game it clicks, I mean, we're looking at a potential 4-touchdown game. I don't know, game flow. I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but he's slinging it around and his receivers are open. He's just been a little off, or his receivers have been not in sync with him. I think Aaron Rodgers at 6,000 is great for tournaments. I think he's great for cash. Another great cash game play, of course, is Jared Goff. I mean, my 2 favorite cash game quarterbacks right now, and it's I'm not including Justin Fields in here because I'm a little skeptical about how much he's going to be running the ball in this game. I think it's fine for tournaments. I just don't want to play him in cash. It's Aaron Rodgers and Jared Goff for me in cash. Those are going to be my 2 cash game court. I only make 1 or 2 cash lineups. I'll probably make 1 with Goff and 1 with Rodgers, or maybe just 2 with Goff. But Goff is my number 1. Rodgers is my number 2 in cash. Gardner Minshew at 5,500, home versus the Saints. I don't hate it, but I think I'd rather play Goff. And unless Minshew is going to be super contrarian, which I doubt, then I don't really see a reason to pivot from Goff to Gardner Minshew. Mike White at 5,400. He's at Seattle. That's an interesting one because I think Mike White could certainly pass all over the Seattle secondary. I think Seattle could probably move the ball against the New York Jets, even though that is a formidable defense. That one, I'm probably not going to Mike White. For me, my quarterbacks are probably going to be Fields, Rodgers, and Goff. That's probably where I'm going at the quarterback position. And I'll just have to wait and see on guys like Pat Mahomes if I want to actually get around to playing them. But I think we can move on to the running back position. And at running back at the top, we see CMC. He's 9,000 at Vegas. I don't really have a big problem with that price. And I think at Vegas, that's a pretty great matchup, obviously. I don't know if I'm getting there with McCaffrey. I will say this. So much value is already opened up in this particular slate. And more value is going to open up. Certainly by the time we get to our game-by-game preview, more value is going to open up. So at 9,000, I really like I don't really like Christian McCaffrey, but I think I really like the idea of playing him because I do think you can afford him. I just don't know if I'm getting there with him. The matchup's so much better than last week. So don't look at last week when you're looking at CMC. Last week, he only had 15 attempts, rushing attempts, 3.1 yards per carry, but it was a much more formidable defense. I think the problem with Christian McCaffrey last week was he only had 2 targets. I mean, he caught both of them, but 2 targets, that's obviously not great. So as we scroll down here, Barkley at 8,000. I think he's a pretty safe play at home, particularly in a must-win against Indianapolis. Indianapolis is just like a wilted flower at this point. I don't even know if it was a flower in the first place, maybe a wilted weed. It's just bad. It's just bad. It's just bad. And keep in mind that this is a good Indianapolis Colts defense. Don't get me wrong. They're good. But how many short fields are the Giants going to have next week? I mean, who's playing quarterback? Is it Nick Foles? Is it Sam Ehlinger? Or is it Matt Ryan? Doesn't matter, right? How many short fields are the Giants going to have? At least 2 or 3 from turnovers or just amazing field position based on punts, inside the 10-yard line for the Colts. I just see, this is one of those games where we always see it from Saquon. We see him be kind of mediocre, and then he busts a run like he did against Minnesota the other day. And I just see that happening maybe more than once against the Indianapolis Colts. They're certainly going to be leaning on Barkley. So at 8,000, that's an extremely fair price. It's a good matchup. I'm definitely like Saquon's kind of like a cash game lock for me. I certainly like Saquon better than CMC. If you're paying up at running back and you're trying to choose between the two, it's going to be Saquon for me. Scrolling down, another guy that I think is pretty good in cash and that I think you can afford because there's so much value, particularly at the receiver position, is James Conner. And we've been talking about him. He's just been a volume monster ever since they let Eno Benjamin go. We really know they didn't have much behind James Conner. He was going to be the workhorse, and that's proven to be the case. His last 4 games, which is since they let Eno go. I think they let Eno go 5 weeks ago. He's averaging 22 plus touches. So it's like around like 22 to 23-ish touches per game is what James Conner is getting. So you're getting him against a soft Atlanta defense at 7,200, like another guy you can play in cash really easily because we're saving money with Jared Goff. We're saving money. We might pair Jared Goff even in cash with Amon-Ra St. Brown, which he's 7,800. It's not expensive for him, but it's kind of a raised price. You can double stack him even in cash. You can double stack him if you want with DJ Shark. You can pay up for Saquon Barkley. You can kind of pay up for James Conner. I say kind of because 7,200 is kind of in that middle tier there. And then when we get to the receivers, you're going to hear that there's a lot of receivers that are completely legit that are in that sort of 5 or sub 5K range. So it's going to be easy to get some of these volume monsters at running back and still have a lineup that you're actually proud of. A lineup that doesn't have Marquise Goodwin in it, like I did for pretty much every single lineup I made last week. So nice week 16 for me. Dalvin Cook at 7,000. I do think it's a pretty good matchup for Dalvin Cook. I just wonder how much we can rely on Minnesota really utilizing him like we think he should be utilized. It's just one of those things, even when his yards per carry are good at the beginning of games, they tend to get away from him, even in positive and neutral game scripts. It's just they're just more inclined to chuck the ball around to guys like Hawkinson, to guys like Justin Jefferson. So I think Dalvin Cook is an interesting, potential, slightly contrarian play. He let so many people down last week, including myself, that I don't think he's going to get a ton of ownership. And if that's the case, and I don't know it to be the case, if that ends up being the case, I don't have a problem going back to him. David Montgomery at 6,900. I think people are certainly going to have to decide if they want to play him at that price. It's a pretty good matchup against Detroit, as we saw last week. And I think he's not going to be a super popular play in Detroit stacks. I just don't think he will be. I think people are going to go to Kmet, and maybe that's it. Or they're going to go to, they're just going to pick a receiver. I could be wrong on that, but I just don't think David Montgomery at 6,900 is super appealing to people. Again, could be wrong. We'll have to wait and see. We'll get a much better idea on Thursday. That's a question I'm going to make sure I ask, especially at some of these running back positions. I mentioned Travis Etienne at 6,400. Meaningless game in week 17, very meaningful game for Jacksonville in week 18. So I don't know that I want to go there unless I hear news that really blows me away about Etienne definitely playing the full slate of snaps here. Cam Akers at 6,100, probably going to be pretty popular coming off the game he had, and he's got a great matchup against the Chargers. I don't mind this play at all. I think if you want to run 3 running backs in cash, I think you could go Cam Akers on the tail end of your Connor and Saquon Barkley stack. It's very affordable, very easy to do. Another guy, in tournaments with Akers, if he gets anywhere close to popular, I'm fine being out on Cam Akers. Zach Moss at 5,400 at the New York Giants. Not really in love with that. Tyler Algier, though. Can we click on, Zach, Tyler Algier at 5,300? His game log. 18 carries, averaging over 4.1 yards per carry against Baltimore, by the way. And now he gets Arizona, which, certainly easier to pass against Arizona than run, but shouldn't be hard for him to run anyway. He caught 4 or 5 targets for 43 yards. This guy is getting used. Don't forget Caleb Huntley is out for the season. So it's really just Cordero Patterson and Tyler Algier that are running the show here. There's a lot of value to be had in this Falcons game. This is a game that is very, very stackable. Now, the problem is, in terms of an actual quarterback stack, a game stack, it's hard to justify like Desmond Ridder or if it's going to be Trace McSorley. But certainly you can do what Mike did and get your quarterback and stack du jour from another game and pile up the pieces in this game. You got guys like Tyler Algier at 5,300. You got guys like Drake London, who we'll talk about in a second, at 4,900. And then you bring it back on the other side with James Conner and there's this guy named Greg Dortch that's a flat 3K. Okay, like you can do like that's what I'm talking about when I talk about value. I'm not just talking about Drake London at 4,900. That's pretty great value considering how much he's getting targeted. But guys like Greg Dortch at 3,000. Listen, is Greg Dortch going to replicate the game he had last week? No, but is he going to replicate half of that? Because if he does, then at 3,000 he's going to pay off in a very, very big way. So again, I think you could do your stack du jour and your run back du jour and make it expensive if you want. And in tournaments, I think you can fit in a couple pieces from each side of this game without having to play the quarterback. So that's something to consider there. The only other, actually, outside of Tyler Algier, under the 5,300 mark, I don't really see a ton that I'm super interested in. We'll have to wait on injury reports. For example, like the Lions backfield, we're not 100% sure what's going on with Jamal Williams as of now. I think he's fine, but we'll have to wait and see. There might be some more value that opens up at the running back position, but that's all for running backs. Again, I'm a big fan here of Barkley, of Connor, and then maybe coming down to Tyler Algier here. And I certainly think guys like Cam Akers are certainly in play, particularly for cash relative to tournaments, but I think you could play in both ways. Let's move on to wide receiver. At the top here, we have the very expected name of Justin Jefferson at 9,500 at Green Bay. It doesn't appear to be a great matchup when you just kind of look at the opponent rank here, but I'm not really worried about matchups. I don't think anybody can cover Justin Jefferson. It's just not a thing. The question becomes, do you want to pay up for Justin Jefferson? And you can afford it, because I just told you a lot of the value that's going to open up here, or that has already opened up. You can absolutely afford Justin Jefferson if you want here. And am I going to get to him? I don't know. I'll probably get to him in a few lineups because I'm certainly not doing I'm not going to do as much as the Dalvin Cook thing. And Justin Jefferson, it's just so scary to not play him. And I think he's going to be affordable even at that heightened price of 9,500. We see guys like Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams. People are going to be off of them because they haven't been very good lately. I think you could play either of them and potentially smash. I mean, the Tua's not going to play this week. And so you're looking at Teddy Two Gloves. I don't think people are going to play a lot of Tyreek Hill because of that, especially because he's 8,900 and you can pay down. Maybe people want to play AJ Brown or Amon-Ra St. Brown. This could be a week to maybe pay up at that receiver position, as opposed to paying up for if you're wanting to pay up for Barkley or CMC. Maybe you bag that and you pay up in tournaments for a contrarian wide receiver, because I think Tyreek Hill is going to be relatively contrarian. Certainly not Justin Jefferson. People are going to pay up for him. But I think Hill is going to be relatively contrarian. I think Devontae Adams could be relatively contrarian, certainly coming off some bad games. Do people want to play A.J. Brown again? In a game script that might be a little different, playing at home against the Saints versus playing last week against Dallas. So I think there's some plays up here you could play. But for me, the plays I like, A.J. Brown, I like a little bit. Justin Jefferson, I like a little bit. Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course, I like a lot. Against the Chicago secondary, he's 7,800, a very, very fair price at home. Really, really like that. As we go down, I think Chris Godwin is in play at 6,800, but I don't think I'm going to get around to him at that price, frankly. I think that's going to be a game that is, I don't know what the over-under is in that Carolina-Tampa Bay game, but I could see the under coming. I think that's going to be a slogfest. I think Carolina's going to run the ball quite a bit. Even though Tampa's hard to run on, I think they're going to run the ball quite a bit. I think we're going to see a lot of clock. I don't know if Fournette, I assume he's playing with that Lisfranc injury, but it's going to be a lot of Fournette, a lot of Rachaad White, a lot of dumps to Chris Godwin, but I think Carolina's going to control the flow of that game. And it wouldn't shock me at all if they win that game. As we go down, Jerry Jeudy at 6,400. I do like him, particularly in Mahomes stacks, or maybe you play Mahomes naked or maybe you play him with Kelsey, obviously, but you can play him naked too and just run it back with Jerry Jeudy and then just get pieces everywhere else, because we don't know where Mahomes is going. Last week I was pretty big on thinking, well, it looks like Juju is the alpha wide receiver. It looks like he's the guy that's going to get the lion's share of targets at the receiver position. And I'm not sure he got his first catch until midway through the fourth quarter, or at least early in the fourth quarter. So this is one of those things where you just don't know where the ball's going. Even Travis Kelce can have his hiccup games. And against Denver, how much are they really leaning on Kelce in the second half? I'm not sure. But that doesn't mean Mahomes isn't going to explode and throw for 300 yards again, because he typically always does that. So I think Mahomes is in play. And if you stack him or not, I think Jerry Jeudy on the run back, that's probably the only run back I'd be interested in this Denver-Kansas City game. So I think he's certainly in play at 6,400. Christian Watson, we obviously need to monitor his health. He's at 5,900. A big play guy. I think you could go to guys like Alan Lazard instead at 5,400, regardless of whether Christian Watson is healthy. I think you could speculate on Romeo Dobbs, particularly if for some reason Christian Watson is ailing or sitting out. But I think Alan Lazard is a pretty interesting play because I don't think he's going to gobble up a ton of ownership, even at the low price of 5,400. Drake London at 4,900. He's going to be kind of like a cash game lock for me. I think Drake London, and scroll down to him because I want to look at his game log, Zach, at 4,900. There we go. So he's playing against Arizona. I think the game script here is going to be pretty neutral the whole way. I think this is going to be a very competitive game, which keeps really everybody in the game, including Drake London. Look at these targets over the last 3 weeks. 12 targets, 11 targets, 9 targets in the last 3 weeks. And he's been pretty efficient with them. I mean, obviously against Pittsburgh, not super efficient, 6 of 12. But since then, 7-11 and then 7 of 9. And, the yardage is there, 96, 70, 95 against Arizona, which, by the way, it's a pretty bad secondary, and it's even worse. I believe Budda Baker is not going to be playing in this game or perhaps the rest of the season. So this is a situation where Drake London, I expect him to get 9 or 10 targets again. And I expect him to catch 6 or 7. And by the way, I expect him to be in the end zone. So at 4,900, to me in cash, he's just kind of an easy guy to put in there to save you some money. Heading down to that Giants core, Hodgins and James, they're 4,500 and 4,300 respectively. I don't know if I'm going back there against Indianapolis. I'm certainly playing Saquon, but I think you could maybe play one of these receivers as well. You're certainly getting some value there, but I think there's more value at 4,300. So go down to 4,300. That's where DJ Shark is. Let's click on his game log as well, Zach. Just a reminder, DJ Shark is at home against the Chicago Bears. And, he had a bad game against the Jets, but that's the Jets, and it was at New York. The Jets are a formidable defense. I'm not really worried about bad games against the Jets, especially if you're not a primary receiver, but the targets have been there outside of the Jets game. It's 5 or more targets in every game and very, very great efficiency, catching 4 or 5, 6 or 7, 5 of 6. The yardage isn't really there, but again, at 4,300 in this game environment, if he's the number 2 receiver here, look out, because I think we're looking at, the yardage is there. Excuse me. I was looking at his long yardage, not his total yardage. Okay, so let me back up. 108 yards, the 18 yards against the Jets, which, it's the Jets, 94 yards and 98 yards. This guy has been smashing, averaging 100 yards per game. I mean, this is a absolutely very easy play. Maybe you sit him on Ross St. Brown and you just stack, to be different in tournaments. You just stack Jared Goff with DJ Shark, and maybe you grab different pieces on the Chicago side. That's certainly something to consider if you want to get different. But I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to get peppered here. And I certainly think Jared Goff is going to pepper more than one receiver. So DJ Shark might just be that guy. But the hope there is that the Bears can push the Detroit Lions. I suspect they can as long as Fields is healthy. If Fields is gimpy for some reason, or if the running is limited, considering the receiver core he has, it could be a problem from a game script standpoint. But it's a chance I'm willing to take. In tournaments, just know that everybody's going to be all over this game. So if you're trying to pivot off something and you think the game script could be a little different with the Lions maybe playing with a big lead and maybe running the ball a little bit more, then maybe you look for a running back in this game on the Lions side, and maybe you fade this game altogether. So, if you're fading this game, you are going to be different from most of the field. So it's just something to consider for sure. Other receivers to consider in that low end range, Chris Moore's at 4,200. Home against Jacksonville. We don't know who Jacksonville is rolling out yet. I suspect they're playing most of their starters, if not all of them. But I also think Chris Moore could have a nice little game at 4,200. That's a price that I'm very familiar with. He was 4,200 2 weeks ago, 3,400 the week before that. But 4,200 is still some pretty good value. If Houston at home is as competitive as they've been, I think Chris Moore could be an absolutely great play. Greg Dortch at 3,000, we talked about him. He caught 10 of 11 targets for 98 yards. The ADOT is low for him. So he's going to get more of those reliable targets relative to, let's say, guys like Marquise Brown. We'll see if Trace McSorley can connect with DeAndre Hopkins. That'll certainly be a focal point, particularly in the beginning of the game next week. But I think Greg Dortch at 3,000, very easy to pay off that price. It allows you to do so much. Let's go over the tight ends real quick before we get out of here and before we look at some questions. And Zach, in the event, I'm not looking at the questions right now, but I will in a second. In the event we have some redraft questions, I'd like you to come on after we cover the tight ends. Kelsey at the top. I don't have a huge problem with it, but I don't think I'm playing Travis Kelsey. this is just not a game environment where I think Kelsey's going to really be pushed. Maybe this is finally the Isaiah Pacheco game that we've kind of been waiting for a few weeks. So maybe that's somebody to consider this week, but I just don't think I'm going to be playing the pass catchers, certainly not at 8,100. But if Travis Kelce ends up being really unpopular, then of course it's time to play Travis Kelce, whether you're stacking him with Mahomes or not. So this is one of those situations where a lot of people are going to want to pay down at the tight end position because, again, you can get away with that at tight end for the most part. I mean, you've got guys like Hawkinson, who's 5,400 this week, but like there are guys like Hawkinson and Ingram who for the last like 3 weeks have been absolutely smashing at like 3,800 price tags or 4,900 price tags. So there's little incentive right now to pay up for guys like Travis Kelce or George Kittle at 5,900. But if that means the ownership's going to be low, then that means you should probably be playing a little bit of Travis Kelce and guys like George Kittle. But for me, I don't know that I'm chasing the Hawkinson points, but I think that's totally fine at 5,400. I'm probably paying down. I'm probably looking at guys like Cole Kmet in a pretty nice matchup there at Detroit on basically a track inside, indoors. Evan Ingram at 4,400 at Houston. Again, I suspect he's going to be playing a full complement of snaps. If that's the case, then they're using Evan Ingram like a receiver at this point. I mean, in fact, if you could click on Evan Ingram's game log at 4,400, Zach, I want to we know what he's been doing the last couple of games, but I want to verify what he did. Yeah. So, I mean, this is like almost obnoxious how much they're using him to the detriment of some of their actual pass catchers. Against Tennessee, caught 11 of 15. Against Dallas, caught 8 of 10. Against the New York Jets, caught 7 of 8. And these yardage totals are extremely impressive. 113, 62, and 162 yards over that 3-game stretch. So, Evan Ingram, again, if Jacksonville's going to roll out their starters, and if Evan Ingram is included in that, which I suspect he will be, no problem there. Noah Fant is somebody to bring up here because, and I'm not sure, let's scroll down and look for Noah Fant's price, Zach, because he's a guy that could be interesting as a result of Will Dissly being put on IR recently. So he is going to be like the alpha tight end where he has been kind of somewhat splitting it. He's been very underwhelming. And I don't really, again, you're playing the Jets, but you're playing at home. And we just saw, who was it? Evan Ingram tear up the Jets at the tight end position. So I think the possibility is there for Fant to have, instead of catching 2 or 3 targets for 12 yards like last week against Kansas City, I think we could see maybe what we saw against San Francisco with 5 of 6 targets. And maybe he lands in the end zone. Maybe instead of 32 yards like he had against San Francisco, maybe we see something like, 55, 60 yards. Again, with Will Dissly out, I think Fant is a pretty interesting contrarian play at home against the Jets for only 3,400. And then Trey McBride at 3,300. If you're trying to get pieces of that game, which I really love, that Arizona at Atlanta game, I think you could potentially include Trey McBride in that. But the reality is, I think the passing game is probably going to go through James Conner, Greg Dortch, and probably DeAndre Hopkins. I think they're going to force feed DeAndre Hopkins some very easy targets to get him in good graces, frankly, with the quarterback. So Trey McBride, just somebody to mention as a super contrarian play, but at 3,300, it's probably a no-go for me there. So that's the tight end position. We'll cover defenses when we cover the game-by-game preview on Thursday. And as everybody knows, on Thursday, what do we do? We do our cheat sheet. We do Mike's top 3, which, again, if you followed that last week, you probably had a really, really good fantasy weekend, particularly a good fantasy Saturday on Christmas Eve. And then, of course, we talk about ownership and, just some of the way we're going to stack games. And again, we talked about that a lot on Thursday. We talked about roster construction. We're kind of putting a premium on that because this late in the season, we kind of know the direction people are going with respect to, everybody's favorite stacks and top 3 stacks and top 3 players and the chalk players people are willing to play and the value that people are willing to play. So it's not just about pivoting off of some of the chalk. I mean, that's important too, particularly in tournaments, but it's also about just getting your roster construction different. And I thought Mike and the person who won our FFT DFS contest, I believe it was Hydro who won the Saturday contest. I thought they did a really good job of having a different type of roster construction with just kind of like lobbing in Isaiah Hodgins and Richie James in your stacks that weren't even stacked with Daniel Jones. Our FFT DFS winner had those stacked with Daniel Jones, but Mike didn't. And he had a really, really impressive lineup that scored 1 point shy of 200. So we'll get into roster construction in a big way on Thursday. But before we get out of here, Zach, can I bring you on real quick? Because I'm curious if I've missed some questions here. I see some, but maybe are there some that kind of jump out to you that need to be answered?
Let's see. You got most of them. There's one of I saw here. I don't know if you touched on it. So they're saying Debo might play this week. How do you think that impacts the rest of the offense if he does?
Oh, well, I think it impacts it. So it's just another weapon for Purdy who has no need to throw it downfield. So, I mean, in terms of how it affects Christian McCaffrey, who I, to be honest, I think McCaffrey and Kittle are with Purdy back there. I think McCaffrey, Kittle, and Debo, when healthy, are the only guys to legitimately play. And that depends on who the opponent is. But I don't think Debo's going to play. I think if he does, I don't think he's going to play a full complement of snaps this week. So I just don't think the Debo thing really affects CMC or Kittle in a very significant way. I wouldn't worry about Debo right now. I would start thinking about how Debo is going to impact the Niners when they get into the playoffs. And when that happens, I think Debo is going to have a lot of things scripted for him. And I think from a touch standpoint, it's going to be Christian McCaffrey, Debo, and then Ayuk and Kittle kind of getting the rest.
Are you staying away from Hurts this week if he does play, just in case if he re-injures something and they just yank him out and wait till playoffs? Are you just staying away completely?
No, I mean, remind me who the Eagles play.
I think at the Saints this week.
Oh, they're at the Saints. Okay, 7-point favorite, 44-point total. I also don't think Jalen Hurts is going to play. If he does, I think I'd be willing to play him. I wouldn't really worry about re-injury. To me, a valuable asset like that, if you're willing to pedal him out there, you're not really worried about somebody coming down on his shoulder and aggravating the injury yet again. Obviously, that can happen, but I feel pretty comfortable playing Jalen Hurts. You know, against the Saints, 44-point. Obviously, if he plays, maybe that total shoots up like a point or two. I think Hurts could be a really nice. It could end up being a contrarian play because people will probably be settled on not playing him, and I don't think a lot of people will change onto him. I think he's a fine play if he's healthy, but I think it's the Gardner Minshew show again this week, personally.
What do you think about Mike White and putting him in your lineups this week?
Yeah, I mentioned him in the quarterback portion of this. So, you know, you can expose Seattle. Mike White's a good quarterback. I think Mike White is the starting quarterback for the Jets next week. And I don't think that's like a hot take. I think that's like a very obvious take at this point. And I really like watching Mike White play. I think the question becomes, what's the game script like? Does Seattle, are they able to move the ball against the Jets? Which I think they will be able to, even though the Jets are formidable. But I worry that they're not going to be able to. So I think if you think, you know, what's the over-under in this game? I'm looking now. It is 42. So I think we're looking at probably a lot of running, a lot of time of possession in that game. I don't mind playing him in a big tournament where you know, maybe it's a 20 max or something, or maybe even a 3 max, and you're like, you know what? I'm throwing Mike White in one lineup because he's cheap. I believe he was 5,400, and you throw him with Garrett Wilson, and maybe you have the DK Metcalf run back, or maybe you try to get lucky on like Marquise Goodwin or something, which I don't recommend at this point. I don't mind that, but again, you can't do that in cash because Goff is right there, and some other quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers are right there at 6,000. In tournaments, I think the pivot off of like the popular stacks like Goff, I don't think it's to Mike White in a 42-point total. I think the pivots are somewhere else. So for me, it's probably a no on Mike White. I think you start to look at the running backs, and I'm going to try to find news because I didn't have you show the game logs for Michael Carter and Bam Knight, but they barely got any rush attempts, either of them. If we can kind of decipher who might be the guy, I think from a contrarian standpoint, that running back, whether it's Michael Carter or Bam Knight, I think that could be an interesting play just to be different at the running back position. But it's probably a no for Mike White for me.
One of the guys I think jumped out at me this week that a lot of people aren't really talking about, Curtis Samuel, obviously with Wentz back. Curtis Samuel was incredible at first like 3-4 weeks of the season. And as soon as Wentz went in the other day, Curtis Samuel became a much bigger factor in the game. Right now I see on the tournament, he's only 4,400. Does he give any intrigue in him?
Yeah, a little bit. So we don't know if Wentz is going to play yet. I mean, as a Commanders fan, and Zach, I don't know if you agree, I think it should be Taylor Heineke. I don't think Wentz gives us a ton of hope personally. But, the emergence of Jahan Dotson is we can't really ignore that, whoever, regardless of who the quarterback is. So, yeah, I don't know. Samuel's getting some backfield carries. He's been very huge lack of production there. It's a no for me. It would probably be Dotson or or a McLaurin in that game. And again, that's a low total as well. It's 40.5. I think Washington's going to play it really close to the vest, and they're just going to hope their defense suffocates Watson and Nick Chubb, and they can do enough with Brian Robinson, maybe Antonio Gibson, McLaurin to get the W there. But they're a 2.5-point favorite at home with a 40.5-point total. Not super excited about Curtis Samuel personally.
You have any interest in Baker against the Chargers? That kind of jumps out to me because obviously they don't have a pick. So he's really just playing for his next contract. I think that's why he performed so well on Christmas. Do you think he could have another big game? I know he doesn't really have any weapons. You got Higbee who went off. Akers went off. Akers is more of kind of not really a pass catching kind of guy. Do you have any interest in Baker? Maybe trying to light up the Chargers? Chargers don't have anything to play for.
That's an interesting point. It's a 40.5-point total. Rams are a 6.5-point dog. Do the Chargers have seeding to play for still, though? I think they might.
Sure.
Because they must, because that wouldn't be a 6.5-point favorite. They wouldn't be a 6.5-point favorite if they didn't have at least some seeding to potentially play for, in my opinion. I think Baker's sneaky, but again, I don't think I'd go there. For me, it's either Cam Akers or maybe you take another shot at Tyler Higbee. But you can run on the Chargers, and I think that's probably going to be the game plan. But I think there are pieces there. I think you could maybe take Cam Akers. Baker, who do you stack him with? I mean, I think that's part of, maybe you stack him with Higbee, I guess. But again, we're kind of chasing last week as opposed to chasing the season. Tutu Atwell's interesting there as a potential game breaker. Tyler Higbee, interesting as a value tight end. Cam Akers, I think, is going to be pretty popular. But I think I'm probably off that game. But I actually think that's a really good game to bring up. I think I might have missed the boat a little bit doing the early look by not I only mentioned Cam Akers there. I think there's some pieces in that game that could be okay. But again, it's only a 40.5-point total.
We normally have a million redraft questions. Now we've got like 4. Here we go. Right here. Chris L. Kamara with lots of exclamation points. Should I consider sitting him going up against the Eagles D? I have CMC and can pick up Jeff Wilson. Herbert didn't do anything. Foreman, I don't trust Foreman because Foreman, when you trust him, he screws you, and when you don't, he goes crazy. So I'm staying away from Foreman. What do you think of Kamara? Like I put up something last week. He's been hard. He had that monster game. I think it was like week 8. Did nothing up until then, and he started showing a little bit against Cleveland. But obviously, it was an interesting game script. It was horrible weather, and they're kind of getting him involved. Do you think this could be a Kamara week, or are you staying away?
Unfortunately, Chris, I think you have to play Kamara because I don't see the other options. I mean, obviously, you have CMC who you're playing. Jeff Wilson, I mean, do you really want to play the game between Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert? I mean, Jeff Wilson looked to be getting some goal line carries, so that's great. But again, Teddy Two Gloves is the quarterback there. How much are they going to be moving the ball relative to when Tua is the quarterback? And then Herbert is extremely speculative. I think Foreman is the only guy I'd even consider, but against Tampa Bay's defense, listen, they're going to run the ball a lot. And I think Foreman's probably, going to get maybe as many carries as Hubbard, but there's too much of a rotation there. So I think I'd have to go with the potential upside of Kamara because we know he has upside, and we know he has upside in a game script where you're chasing points and likely no Chris Olave. I mean, you would think that at a certain point, Kamara is going to have that game. And is it this week? I'm not sure, but I don't think you can take the risk of sitting him this week with what you got.
Have you looked into any of the guys that have the contract incentives with the certain stat-based performances? Because that's like normally like back 2 weeks of the season, I hammer all those props and I put all those guys in my lineups because they're going to get target fed. Yeah,
that's interesting. No, I haven't looked at that. And not only do we have the Thursday show, but we have the Friday prop show on the early edge. And that'll be something to look into. Nothing has certainly kind of jumped across my eyes with respect to any of that, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So whether it's this week or next week, I certainly think that's going to be in play. The famous one there was that I remember last was Gronkowski, where he needed I can't remember 5 catches or something and a certain number of yards to hit like $1 million incentive. So that was pretty cool.
What do you think about Godwin this week against the Panthers? I think Horn's out at least for the regular season, and that's a big game. But that Tampa offense has been horrible.
It's been horrible, but Godwin's like the only guy. I think Russell Gage might have hurt himself last week. I got to check the injury report on him. He got bent back on his knee.
He went back in. He was kind of limping a little bit.
Oh, did he come back in after that? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, so yeah, I think Godwin is the guy. I mean, Mike Evans has been phased out, and he's going. Tom Brady's going to the reliable targets, and Godwin in the middle of the field, 6-7 yard out, turn around, and Godwin's there. So I like Godwin. I just don't love him because I wonder what the upside is there. The Carolina defense has been pretty decent. Their secondary started to get healthier as of a few weeks ago. And this is not the Tampa Bay team we thought it was going to be. And every time we keep saying, well, this week we're going to see it, we never see it. It doesn't exist. That's why. So it's just one of those things where I think we have to temper our expectations. Godwin would be the only guy I'd play on the Tampa side in that game. But this week at his price, which again, it's 6,800. Listen, Godwin has been a flat 6,000 or 6,200 most of this year, or at least certainly recently he has been. Why would I pay 6,800 away in a passing offense that seems like super disjointed? Even if it's like a contrarian play, which it won't be, I don't see the ceiling there.
You're not interested in fourth string tight end / fullback Keefe this week in week 17 in your lineups?
Yeah, I don't think so.
What a name. What an absolute name. And he gets involved. He plays. Let's see that. What do you think about Garrett Wilson this week going up against probably Tariq Woolen and Seahawks? And these both teams, this is must win for both of them.
Yeah, Garrett Wilson will get open. I have no question about that. And I don't think Tariq Woolen's going to shadow. And that secondary as a whole, Tariq Woolen, great draft pick. For the record, Seattle has done great in the draft. They drafted 2 offensive linemen that have played pretty much the entire year. Extremely formidable rookie offensive linemen that sort of propelled Seattle early. Tariq Woolen, another great draft pick. Seattle drafts well. And I actually think Pete Carroll's a pretty good coach. Even though we just see him as a guy who chews gum and is a rah-rah guy, he usually takes really bad teams and makes them decent. But that said, Garrett Wilson and Mike White, it's a marriage made in heaven, which goes back to, Zach, what you were asking about Mike White. I don't want to play Mike White with Garrett Wilson, but do I want to play just Garrett Wilson? Whether it's redraft or DFS, it's something you kind of have to consider. Garrett Wilson can get loose against anybody, especially the Seattle defense. I see Swaggy P here, and we'll take a couple more questions if you have them. But he says the problem with Drake London play is I think the Falcons are going to run the ball the entire game. I don't disagree with you. But what do you mean by that? Because what you'd have to be telling yourself is that they're not going to throw the ball at all. And that we know that's not the case, because what we have to look at is what is the volume and what is the percentage of the volume that Drake London is getting? And the answer is a ton. The answer is a ton. Like we're talking potentially like 60 to 70% of the targets.
Yeah, 42 over the last 3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken.
Say that one more time.
42 targets over the last 3 weeks against good defenses.
Right. And keep in mind, there's not a lot of targets that are being had in the first place. So the point here is, let's say Desmond Ridder only throws it. Let's say he only has 14 pass completions. I don't know what the over-under is going to be. I'm actually really curious to check that. But how many of those 14 pass completions go to Drake London?
There's no one else. Pitts is out.
He's not going to anybody else.
Jameer Byrd, Zacchaeus. They got one other guy, Hesse, who had the same number of catches as Devontae Adams this week, that Parker Hesse, which is a wild stat that could be used on Final Jeopardy one day. There's no one to throw to. Arthur Smith has to give it to Drake London, or the offense just will not move, because they know you're going to try to run it with running backs you've never heard of. They have to give London the ball.
Yeah, and for the record, he's getting open too, and he's making really great catches when the ball's been behind him, like the contested catches, the wide open catch, like he's doing everything right. The route running is good. This is a talented receiver. It goes back to our offseason series when Jacob Gibbs was on this very show saying, listen, Drake London rates out the best of any of these receivers in terms of making an impact early. And I think he was right about that. We just didn't get a chance to see it with Marcus Mariota. But yeah, even if they run the ball a ton, I mean, I do think Arizona's going to push them a little bit. And I do think we're looking at somewhere between 6 and 7 catches. I know that sounds like a lot, but I think we're looking at 6 to 7 catches for Drake London. Because remember, even if they have a lead in this game, which I don't know if they will, but even if they have a lead, first few quarters, they're going to be passing it a little bit here and there. And it's going to be the Drake London show when they do.
Yeah. What do you think about the Miami receivers with or without Tua this week? I think a lot of people might stay away because Tua might not play, but Bridgewater was good with Hill. It was not really a factor with Waddle earlier in the season. Are you interested if there's a low number of people playing them in tournaments?
Yes, with both of them, actually. The matchup at New England, listen, New England's, this is one of those, you have to check the weather a little bit too, but New England's been like straight up bad. Just in general, they've been bad on defense. They have regressed in a really big way. And I think, who do we think Teddy Bridgewater's best friend is going to be? It's going to be Tyreek Hill, especially in some of the short area routes. I see them like scheming him open inside, 5 and 10 yard routes and just seeing what he can do after the catch. So I think both of them are in play. The discount you get from Waddle is $1,400. Sometimes that discount is greater. I think it's $8,900 versus $7,500 this week. But I like Tyreek Hill better because I love what I expect him to do after the catch. Whereas Waddle, he can do great after the catch, but Tyreek Hill is the guy that's going to take a 5 yard out and make a house call on it. So I think Tyreek Hill is very much in play. If he's low owned, I think with all the value that opens up on this slate, I think at $8,900, he makes a ton of sense.
Because especially with having the Bills and the Bengals on Monday Night Football, there's not as many top receiver options for you to put in your lineups this week with Higgins, Chase, and Diggs. Even though Diggs has been horrible over the past month, there's a lot. You got to. So I'm going to do one more on here. I don't. You think the Jags are going to rest players? I don't think. I mean, like they've kind of locked it up, but like you want to keep these guys fresh going to the playoffs. I mean, maybe rest if they're way up, but Zay Jones. I mean, he didn't do anything on Thursday, but obviously they're going up against a really good secondary. The Jets, would you put him in your lineups this week?
Yeah, I would over Ayuk. And keep in mind when teams rest players in situations like this, and again, Zach, I agree with you. If I had to put money on it, I'd say the Jags don't rest anybody, but I don't know. So that's why I'm not like big on Trevor at 6,200 or big on Travis Etienne at 6,400 on a Tuesday. Well, talk to me on Thursday. We'll have a different opinion there, but I don't know that Zay Jones gets rested. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't even know that Evan Ingram gets rested. I think that's one of those things where Trevor maybe plays like in a scenario where they're quote resting, which again, I'm not saying they are. I think Trevor plays 2 quarters still, but I think Zay Jones plays 4. Like you don't really like that. That's not an asset you rest necessarily unless you're up 30 points. So I would be comfortable playing Zay. I mean, the Niners, I'm always having to remind myself who everybody plays. The Niners are at the Raiders. Ayuk could have a good game. I just don't know that they need to have him have a good game against the Raiders. I think it's a lot of CMC. It's a lot of Kittle. Ayuk's going to get 4 catches maybe. What does he do with them? I think I'd rather go Zay Jones in his matchup versus Brandon Ayuk. So
what do you think about Devontae Adams this week? He's had like a pretty down December, but a lot of people are probably going to stay away. What do you think about him against San Fran?
I don't mind Devontae Adams. This is one of those situations where do they force feed Devontae Adams against San Francisco in a negative game script? Probably. They're playing at home. It's not like the Raiders are like giving up. So in terms of like resting players or anything. So I think this is one of those games where if everybody's not going to play Devontae Adams is such a good case study. Tyreek Hill is such a good case study in terms of where we think the ownership's going to go. Because on this slate, you can afford to take a chance on a high-priced guy like that in tournaments because not a lot of people are going to be interested in playing either of those guys, in my opinion. So I think Devontae Adams in tournaments, in cash, it's a no way for either Adams or Tyreek Hill. But in tournaments, I don't have a problem with it at all. I mean, am I going to get there? I have to I'll do it before Thursday. I have to create some lineups first and kind of see if it makes sense to get there with him. But I think Devontae, between Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill, I actually like Devontae Adams better. Interesting. I think Devontae Adams could have one of those games where you're looking at 12 targets, he catches 8 of them, and has a touchdown or 2.
I know it's only Tuesday, but is there anybody with pricing that you like so much this week that you're just like he's going to be in every one of your lineups?
Yeah, so I hesitate to say Drake London there because I do think, to Swaggy's point, there could be a game script where he's just not that needed. If Arizona, if Trace McSorley is the quarterback, and I don't think Trace McSorley is
playing.
Oh, you think Colt McCoy's playing?
Colt's playing?
Okay, my bad on that. Because if Colt McCoy's playing, Drake London is a lock for me. He is an absolute lock because Colt McCoy is a good quarterback. Colt McCoy can start in this league, and he has started in this league, and he's been decent. Against Atlanta, Colt McCoy is going to be able to move the ball with James Conner, with DeAndre Hopkins, with Marquise Brown, with Greg Dortch, you name it. So, yeah, if Colt McCoy's playing, then Drake London is a lock at 4,900. In tournaments, he's going to be really popular, so I don't mind pivoting off of him, but he's certainly a lock in cash for me. Other guys that I really like, Greg Dortch at 3,000. With Colt McCoy back, he's not quite as appealing to me, but he's still somewhat appealing because he's going to be in the game. He's probably going to get a handful of targets. Not a lock play for me. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to end up being I don't want to say a lock play for me because I think there are going to be tournaments where I pivot off that game entirely and just hope that it's, running back versus running back. And they just, they don't, maybe Detroit doesn't need to rely on the passing game.
I don't think Williams is going to play this week, and their running backs, I'm pretty sure it might've been 2 weeks ago, but their running backs, I think it was the other day, it was Raymond had like the biggest yards per rush average of all their running. Like the running backs have been, I think they're coming to realize that if they want to make the playoffs, starts with getting the ball to Amon-Ra. It's not spreading around. He's spreading a little bit around. Get to Chark, but when you're getting these guys, Zylstra's getting 3 touchdowns. That's not scaring the defense. You got to open it up a little bit.
Hey, listen, if we don't see Jamal Williams, and again, it's Tuesday, so we're really just having this conversation to speculate, but that means it's DeAndre Swift and Justin Jackson, and Justin Jackson is a flat 4K. So, I mean, again, we have a ton of value that's sort of already opened up, but it's more at the receiver position, at the running back position. By Thursday, we're going to have like probably a flat 4K running back to consider, whether it's Justin Jackson or somebody else. So yeah, and again, that kind of lends itself to playing whatever you want, because and that might include guys like Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams. As far as guys that I'm definitely having in my lineup, Drake London is almost there. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's not there yet, but at the running back position, I may go all in on Saquon Barkley. Really? And I'm really close to going all in on James Conner. And when I go all in, I literally go all in tournaments, because I don't play 150 lineups. I play like 8 or 9 variations, maybe less, maybe 6 or 7 variations of tournament lineups. And every lineup might have James Conner, Saquon Barkley, and Drake London. I'm not sure yet, but Drake London is the guy that just seems too good to pass up. I think DJ Chark's going to make his way into a lot of lineups as well. Whether I'm stacking that game or not, I love the value of DJ Chark at home.
Cool.
All right. Well, I think we covered, and Mr. Scampers, you mentioned no Buda Baker. Yeah, and I brought that up earlier in the show.
Exactly.
So it really is kind of open season for Desmond Ridder to maybe get off a few more pass attempts. And again, if Colt McCoy is the starting quarterback, that makes Arizona like a legit offense. Like, this is like, I made the comment 2 weeks ago that I think Colt McCoy runs the offense better, more efficiently than Kyler Murray. I think there's plenty of people that might agree with me there who have seen Colt McCoy over the years. Now, Kyler Murray's more dynamic. He has more upside. He can do things that Colt McCoy can't do. But in terms of running the offense, I'm a Colt McCoy guy. I think I always have.
Colt's he's a raw milk guy.
Is he really?
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Like straight up, like, it's not FDA approved. I don't recommend anybody that's watching right now or listening right now do it. But he's a straight from the cow, nothing else kind of guy, which is interesting.
And I see the Mr. Scampers, you say, sorry, I'm late. By the way, anybody who comes in late, it's at the end of the show, not a big deal, but definitely remind yourself to hit the like button. Garrett Pocella says, does Khalil Herbert hurt Monty's touches this week? Yeah, probably a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be enough to impact. I think if I'm remembering correctly, Montgomery had about 15 rush attempts last week, and I'm going to double check that real quick because I want to be right.
I got it right here. Let me pull it up.
Yeah, he got 4 or 4 targets, and he had 16 carries for 62 yards. The yards per carry was bad at 3.9, but he's usually over 4, sometimes in the 5 range. And again, against Detroit, this might be the guy that they lean on. This might be like the key piece to stack against whoever you're playing on the Detroit side. So, I mean, if you're getting 20 touches against Detroit and some of those are in the passing game, yes, please on that. 6,900 is a pretty high price, but hopefully that keeps some ownership off of him. And so you can play David Montgomery at somewhat lower ownership. Yeah. All right, Zach, go ahead.
Last week I was talking about Montgomery. His numbers in December over the past 3 years have been incredible. I think he's been like top 3 at the position. Maybe just cold weather is his thing, but I don't know. I think they probably bumped up his pricing because of that.
Maybe. And I remember that because I remember not being on David Montgomery when all of that was happening. And I'm like, what's going on here? So hopefully we get some of that from David Montgomery this week. I think you could consider him in cash because I do think he's guaranteed to get, again, regardless of the game script, I do think he's guaranteed to get somewhere between 16 and 18 touches. That's pretty good for cash, again, against Detroit. So something to consider. Everybody, thank you for popping in here. We went pretty long because we like to answer some of these redraft, and some of these are DFS questions, of course, as well. And Loso says, Vikings DST good for this upcoming week.
No.
Yeah. And well, is it though? At the Packers?
Packers need to win out. You think you're getting Rodgers out right now. I'm not testing them.
I don't even understand why you would say that. Like, why would you possibly say that? And this is not an Aaron Rodgers comment. The Vikings D is trash. This is a bad defense. So no, it's not a good week to play the Vikings D. But I mean, if you play it, you'll be the only one playing him. So that's kind of cool. If Rodgers gets hurt, maybe that works out. Anyway, everybody, thanks for being in here. We went a little long because we want to answer some of your questions. Sorry we got to them at the end of the show, but that's usually how we do it. Hopefully you got something from the lineup recap because, again, I think when you look at Mike's lineup, and I believe it was either Kush or Hydro, when you look at that, like you can see some of the roster constructions that you probably never considered because they just don't seem very conventional. I very much encourage you to go back and look at those lineups, or if you're listening, go back and listen to who was in those lineups and think about that when you're stacking or you're creating your lineups this week, because again, there's going to be some popular games, right? Bears at Lions, Vikings at Packers, maybe Niners and Raiders, probably not. But those 2 games that I just mentioned, Bears at Lions and Vikings at Packers, among others, maybe Atlanta Zona is going to have some interesting components in it, but not really a QB stack. My point is, because a lot of the ownership is going to be concentrated there, go back and look at how some of these people won. How Mike won $1,000 with one lineup. How Hydro won our 200-person FFT DFS contest, because it's those types of constructions that can really work, and they're different. They're unconventional. That's what's going to win you tournaments in December and in January. It's being unconventional, a little different, really kind of going all in on a theory or a game script. If you do that, you might get $0 and be close to last place, but you also might be close to first place. And that's what we're trying to do here in tournaments specifically. So thank you for joining the show, Zach. Thanks for coming on to the show. Thanks for doing both the producing and some of the analysis. I know that's super difficult to do. So appreciate you doing that. Everybody, thanks for being here. We'll be back Thursday at 5 o'clock. It's going to be FFT DFS game-by-game preview with Mike McClure, which of course includes the cheat sheet, the top 3 at each position, and our favorite plays and roster constructions from every single game. For now, that's Zach. I'm Sia. This is Fantasy Football Today DFS. We will see you on Thursday.